While a lot of people, myself included, did not have the highest opinion of the Stanford Cardinal entering last season, well, last season gave us some mixed bags. Yes, they won a couple games in the Pac-12, but they lost to an FCS school and overall saw a lot of struggles throughout the season. 2024 is a year where Troy Taylor's group hopefully should improve. This is another season that where a lot of people are counting out the Stanford Cardinals, so can they exceed expectations again this season and be competitive in their new stomping grounds in the ACC? You're about to find out what I think here in this video. What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth. My apologies with Tailgate Nate today. I want to welcome you to my channel, welcome you to prediction season and my last Power 4 video. Give it up for the last Power 4 video. After this one is out, hey, every single Power 4 team, that's the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the ACC, will have a video on my channel. If you're a college football nerd like I am, you got to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, especially so you can hear my thoughts during the season. And just thank you so much for watching this video and for all your guys' support for prediction season so far. You can support the channel by pretty much interacting with it in any way you can. Liking, commenting, sharing. Go watch my other videos, especially if you're a fan of a Power 4 team that's not the Stanford Cardinal. Hey, there's a video up on my channel now. We'll dive on in to the Group of 5 realm after this one, but we got to talk about the Stanford Cardinal first. How do we do that? Well, we'll take a deep dive into the team's offense, into the defense, and at the end of the day, we will go through the Stanford Cardinal football schedule and give it a game-by-game preview and prediction. But a couple more things before we do start, because right over here will be the stats the team put up either offensively or defensively last season. And of course, for your viewing pleasure, right below the team's logo, I have put the team's coaching staff. The offense for the Stanford Cardinal, that's where we usually start, of course, with the offense. And well, you take a look last season. Overall, when you watch this team play, there were a couple games last season where you saw some really good things. And that Colorado game was one of them. Albeit Colorado, yes, didn't have the best defense last season, but besides that point, Stanford has some pretty good offensive players here, and overall, it just didn't work out to where they had a good stat line from last season. There is some good talent here, and we're going to talk about it. You have to talk about Ari Patu, though, who does leave from this quarterback room. Now, didn't play much last year, only threw 6 passes, but was a pretty talented player coming into Troy Taylor's regime. He decided to go a different direction, though, with Ashton Daniels, who had 2,247 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions on around 59% completion percentage last season. Justin Lamson also does come back. He threw 88 passes last year, but only completed 38 of them. For those math nerds out there, that's only 43% completion, no touchdowns, 2 picks. However, Justin Lamson brings another factor to this team. He was the team's leading rusher, and Ashton Daniels, well, he was the team's second leading rusher last season. So both of your leading rushers came from the quarterback position last season, which is not something you want to see and something I'll talk about more in a second. But back to talking about Ashton Daniels, and if you remember the stat line that I just said, 11 touchdowns, 8 picks, around 59% completion percentage, 2,200 yards, give or take. That's expected to improve here in 2024. The touchdown to interception number has got to get better before anything else does, because, well, hey, you also do have a very talented freshman entering this team. I believe a 4-star, according to 24/7 Sports. Elijah Brown is coming into this program, projected to be that second string, at least according to ourlads.com. That's the site I use to get all my depth chart information and things like that. Ashton Daniels is going to be the starter this season. If he does not perform up to standard, you could see a switch to Justin Lamson. Possibly even the freshman Elijah Brown should get some pretty big minutes this season. Daniels is going to be the starter. You look for him to improve his play from last season, and it'll help improve the Stanford offense in 2024. Running back room, well, hey, your 2 leading rushers among running backs last season, even though they only had around 215 yards each last season, well, both of them are gone. E.J. Smith has entered the transfer portal. Pretty talented player that had 53 carries for 218 yards and 1 touchdown. Casey Filkins is gone as well, 215 yards and a touchdown on 38 carries for him. Obviously a higher yards per carry mark than E.J. Smith, but you do lose your 2 leading rushers out of the running back position, and I mean, you go ahead and take a look at where the carries were distributed from last season. Lamson had 120 carries. Daniels had 110 carries. The running back with the most carries last season was E.J. Smith, and he only got 53 carries. That's why the run game struggled so much last year, and no, it's not to the detriment of what Troy Taylor is trying to do. It's just the system that he runs, but the quarterbacks are often very much so utilized in this run game. Well, the running backs are going to have to take a step in the right direction this year. Cedric Irvin, Ryan Butler, Caleb Hampton, and Brendan Barrow could all see playing time this season. Irvin got some playing time last year. It did have a 100-yard season last year, but again, this is a running back room that'll have to take some steps forward, and quarterbacks that may have to be more effective in the run game this year as well. Wide receiver room, hey, really only one notable loss there. It's John Humphreys, a guy that was a depth piece last season, only 71 yards on 5 catches, did have 1 touchdown last season, so he did provide some pretty solid value when he did play, but he's run out of eligibility. He's exhausted it. He's graduated. And Benjamin Yarasek, while he wasn't the leading receiver among tight ends last season, you could argue he is the most talented tight end on this team. And he is going to go try to look and go prove it over with the Georgia Bulldogs. And he's got big shoes to fill. Yeah, he's trying to fill the Brock Bowers role, but again, a very talented player that's capable of doing it. You lose a really good tight end in Benjamin Yarasek from last season, 239 yards and a touchdown on 16 catches last season. Okay, wide receiver room, let's talk about it. Who does come back? Well, Alec Iomaner, I believe he was the guy that had the crazy 300-yard or close to it game against the Colorado Buffaloes in that overtime fiasco. Last season, he had 1,013 yards, 6 touchdowns on 62 catches, did have a 97-yard touchdown last season as well. He's going to be a huge piece to this wide receiver room for Stanford this year. Will absolutely be a candidate to get 1,000 yards again this season, and while it might be hard to achieve, he can definitely get there because he just did it last season. Tiger Bachmeier, Mudia Rubin, and Bryce Farrell also all come back, while another freshman in Emmett Mosley, you'll see play some big minutes in this wide receiver room. Tight end room, this is the guy that had the leading, or I should say led the receiving among tight ends last season. It's Sam Roush, and hopefully I'm saying that last name right. 288 yards. Sadly did not break into the end zone last season. That's probably due to change here in 2024. And Shield Taylor will be back here as well to kind of back up that tight end role. But you also are getting Weiss Griffin, who is coming in through the transfer portal. He's coming over from Washington, only a 2-star rated transfer. But hey, it adds some depth to this tight end room, some depth, especially with you losing Benjamin Yarasek, that Stanford much needed. And while you lose James Pogorelk on the offensive line through the portal, pretty much everyone else that I saw does come back from last season. Connor McLaughlin, Trevor Mayberry, Jake, I will butcher this last name, Mike Kula, Simeon Pale, Levi Rogers, and Luke Beklenko. They are all back here on the offensive line for Stanford. Now, again, the offensive line has to improve. It has to get better in run blocking, and you allowed 41 sacks last season. That simply can't happen. When you talk about the Stanford offense this season, you do have a lot of returning talent. Yes, you lose your top 2 leading rushers among running backs from last season. Cool. As long as Ashton Daniels and Justin Lamson can improve in their rushing ability, and by that I mean average more yards per carry than what they were able to do last season, as long as the offensive line improves to help along with that cause, and these running backs here take some steps in the right direction, I think the wide receiver tight end room is going to be pretty solid overall for Stanford. And overall, I see Stanford being able to have an offense that, look, I think can slide in one of 2 directions, but overall, I think has the potential to be pretty solid and competitive in the ACC this season. Of course, Stanford now joining the ACC. When you move over to talk about the defense, much like the offense, it doesn't lose a lot of talent, but there is some pretty important talent that leaves a defense that, look, and there's no way to say this was just one of the worst defenses in the country last season. They allowed almost 38 points per game, over 460 yards per game. The rush defense was not great. The secondary, almost 300 yards per game. That's just not good at all. 51.3% conversion rate on third down. So teams were converting more than half of their third downs against Stanford. You're looking for all of that to change here for the Cardinal in 2024. Well, let's talk about what they lost before we talk about what they get back. Stanford runs a unique defensive system. They run a 2-4-5. So not many defensive linemen, true defensive linemen, I should say, get playing time, but you do lose 2 of them from last season. Lance Kennelly is going to be gone. While I look down here at the defensive stats, 35 tackles and a sack and a half for him last season. Jackson Moy is going to be gone here as well. 15 tackles and half a sack last season. They have both entered the transfer portal. Before I move any farther, I will say that you could easily equate these defensive linemen. You could equate some of them, such as Lance Kennelly, to edge rushers, outside linebackers. On the ourlads.com depth chart, they do call them outside linebackers. They kind of play the edge rusher type position, though. Kennelly was one of those guys. I decided to slot him in here in the defensive line. But again, you can really mix up the linebackers with the defensive linemen here. But for the returners and newcomers, I will have you know, anyone that's going to be sort of that edge rusher, outside linebacker type player is listed as a linebacker entering 2024. Kennelly might very well be the exception where I mix things up on that, but a loss nonetheless. You take a look at the defensive line entering this season: Anthony Franklin, Tobin Phillips, Zach Rowell, and Zach Buckley will be four guys slotted right up the middle of this defensive line for the Stanford Cardinal. They will play the 2 in the 2-4-5. And so those are some names that you will see there playing that position. Franklin had 3 sacks last season. Could be really, really good here for this team in 2024. You go ahead and take a look at the linebacker room, and yes, Spencer Jorgensen is gone, 39 tackles and a sack. He's run out of eligibility and graduated, but the linebacker room, again, including those edge rushers, has a lot of very good talent. Gathan Bernadelle is one of them, leading tackler from last season who had 87 tackles, is back. Tristan Sinclair is also back, 71 tackles, second on the team last season, and he returned a lot of other really good talent as well. David Bailey, Tavaru Watafiti, Wilfredo Ibar, and Matt Rose all come back, as well as some other names that you could put here on this board as well. And you get Josiah Galvin, who is a transfer coming into this program. He is coming over from Northern Iowa and should play some big minutes in this linebacker room. Defensive back room, let's talk about it. Much like a team we just talked about a little bit ago in the Vanderbilt Commodores, no notable losses out of the cornerback room. So in the safety position, however, you do lose a couple really good players. Alakai Gilman is going to be gone, 50 tackles, 3 pass defended, and interception last season. And Jimmy Wyrick is gone off this team as well. Wyrick last season, give me a minute while I take a look for his stat line here. So Jimmy Wyrick was a guy that only had 1 tackle for the team last season, played in the team's first game in Hawaii, and I can't remember if he had gotten injured or not, but when you take a look at Wyrick, he's a high upside player, and even though, again, the production just didn't happen for him last season, again, only 1 tackle, that's still a pretty notable loss to me, at least, in the safety room. You go ahead and take a look at what the defensive back room has entering 2024. Well, your cornerback room looks like this. Colin Wright, Zeron Manley, and Aaron Morris all come back to play corner for this team in 2024, while Mitch Liegber, hopefully again saying that last name right, 53 tackles, 2 sacks, did have a pass defended last season as well. He comes back. Scotty Edwards, Omari Porter, and Jashawn Frosto Ramos is coming back to the safety room as well. You do get a guy coming in from the transfer portal in Javion Green to be more specific. He is coming over from the Washington Huskies. So could be a pretty solid piece to that safety room for the Cardinal in 2024. And when you talk about the kicking room, because, hey, special teams, kickers are people too. You got to show them some love. A Lou Groza Award, I believe, semifinalist last season, Joshua Gardy, is off to the NFL. Very talented kicker that you do lose, but you do get your 2 main punters from last season back. Aiden Flintoff and Connor Wesselman are back to do the punting, while Emmett Kenny will have some really big shoes to fill, taking over for Gardy in that kicking role. So overall, when you take a look at this defense for the Stanford Cardinal, I mean, look, it just has to get better this season for Stanford to take a step in the right direction. Yes, I know Troy Taylor's group won 3 games last season, but that was to a Colorado team where, look, if you got hot offensively like Alec Ionamore did, and some other things go right for you, you're going to win. They ran into a Washington State team last season that down the stretch just crumbled, and their only other win was against a Hawaii team that was up and down last season. Overall, when you take a look at Stanford, again, that defense has to get better this season. They got some pretty solid pieces to do it. Didn't bring in a ton through the portal, but getting Galvin and Green, I think, will be big pieces to this defense. You just have to see improvement from this defensive side, really no matter what, here in 2024 for Stanford to take a step in the right direction, which leads me into the Stanford Cardinal football schedule. Any game at home is going to be underlined. Well, any game on the road is in italics or that slanted text. Any game you see in green, well, it's a game that I think Stanford's going to win pretty easily, while any game in yellow will be a close competitive game, but overall I think Stanford's going to win. And then red is any game that I see the Cardinal losing this season. We'll dive into the schedule after a water break, because hydration is important. Make sure you all drink water. And now let's dive on in to talking about the Stanford Cardinal this season. They start out with a game on a Friday in their home stadium against the TCU Horned Frogs. So even though Stanford switched conferences this past cycle. Hey, still a Power 4 on Power 4 matchup, but I think TCU is going to be a pretty solid team this year. Much like Stanford, though, TCU has a lot of defensive questions, but the offensive talent is there, and I think overall that's going to propel TCU to a win here. Could be a high-scoring offensive type game as both teams have their defensive struggles that they need to get sorted out. Even though Stanford's at home, I like the pieces TCU has offensively a little bit more than what Stanford does. In fact, a little bit might be understating it. I like them quite a bit more than what Stanford has offensively. I like the scheme that Sonny Dykes runs a little bit better, and that's why I think TCU will beat Stanford in week 1. But the Cardinals should be able to pick up their first win of 2024 against Cal Poly. That is an FCS level team. Now, Stanford did lose their FCS game last season. They lost to Sacramento State. It was Troy Taylor's old team. Probably had some motivation to do it there. Stanford should be able to beat Cal Poly this season. We'll see what happens, though. Again, they did lose that FCS game last year. Now, I'm not downplaying what Sacramento State was last year. That was one of the better teams in the FCS last season. But Cal Poly is nowhere near what Sacramento State was or has been over the past couple seasons. Stanford should be able to win that game. You get your first bye week before you enter your first games of of ACC play, and it starts out with the Syracuse Orange. That's going to be a loss for me. Kyle McCord is coming over from Ohio State. He got a lot more hate than what I thought he deserved coming over from Columbus. I thought he ended up being a pretty solid quarterback there for that team. Now what the fans in Columbus wanted, you're going to see him playing in the Dome for Syracuse this year, along with some really talented offensive pieces. Fran Brown is coming in at head coach. And overall, Syracuse, while Fran Brown might not be the most flashy hire, and it's a very big unknown hire as the former defensive back coach from Georgia, I think Syracuse is going to be a really solid team this year, and I got Stanford losing that one there on the road. I don't see them beating Clemson on the road. I expect Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley to take a jump offensively. Cade Klubnik being the quarterback, Garrett Riley being the offensive coordinator for the Clemson Tigers in 2024. The defense, while it hasn't been elite like it has been when Clemson was back competing for national championships on a very consistent basis, they've kind of fallen a little bit below that. They're still one of the better teams in the ACC, guys. Again, that offense is going to take a step forward. The defense will still be really good. Clemson will beat Stanford this season. Virginia Tech will beat Stanford this season. Hey, Kyron Drones and Bashal Tootin, I think, are going to run literally and figuratively all over the Stanford Cardinal defense. Again, this defense has enough talent to make improvements this season. Not enough, in my opinion, to be able to slow down an offense like what Virginia Tech is going to have this season. When you move to the other side of the ball, well, Virginia Tech's got a lot of good defensive pieces, and much like Clemson and possibly Syracuse, probably not quite there yet, but much like Clemson, they're going to be one of the better teams in the ACC this season, and Virginia Tech will win that game. Notre Dame's going to be one of the most talented teams in the country. Marcus Freeman's got a very, very talented team, albeit they're young. Yes, they lose a lot of pieces through the wide receiver room, through the transfer portal. Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather, among some others. They're getting Riley Leonard to come in from the portal. Benjamin Morrison is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country, and I love what Marcus Freeman is doing with that program. Notre Dame will push for a college football playoff spot, and Notre Dame will beat their rival Stanford in Week 7. As Stanford has to go on the road and perform in front of Touchdown Jesus. Well, Touchdown Jesus will help Notre Dame beat Stanford, although I don't know that they're going to need much help in doing so. Notre Dame clearly the much better team than Stanford will be this season. I think SMU is ready to compete in the ACC this season. Now, this may be one of those weird things where college football magic will do its thing, and because SMU transitioning from a Group of 5 conference to a Power 4 conference now may slip up in some games that, hey, they're probably definitely more talented than the team on the other side. It just comes with the physicality and nature of playing in a Power 4 program. But I don't necessarily fully believe in the Power 4 over Group of 5 bias. I'm not really all for that because I think SMU is going to be a really good team in the ACC this season. Preston Stone is one of the better quarterbacks in the entire country, and SMU has got a lot of speed offensively and defensively. The Ponies run over the Cardinal and run through the trees. SMU will win that game there, even though Stanford has it at home. You want a game where I think Stanford can win in the ACC this season? Okay, let's take you to Week 9, October 26th, when you play Wake Forest. That team loses a ton of talent off of last season. Overall, Wake Forest definitely is a team this season where you could expect a pretty big drop-off for Dave Clawson's group. However, I am of the mind that, again, Dave Clawson, pretty solid head coach, pretty good head coach. You could make the case even. I think Wake Forest is going to be competitive this season. There are some good offensive and defensive pieces on that team. And I think they outdueled the Stanford Cardinal here. I got Wake Forest winning that one, so the losing streak here is up to 6, and it's going to continue. You got to go on the road and play NC State. They're getting a ton of talented transfers in. Grayson McCall at the quarterback position is one of them. Jordan Waters comes in. The defense, we know what style of defense Dave Doran's group plays. That's a loss. After your second bye week, you have to play the Louisville Cardinals. That is going to be a loss there as well. Yes, Louisville loses a lot from last season, but they're one of the teams that hit it out of the park in the transfer portal, and Jeff Brom's group is going to be right back towards the top of the ACC this season. I think Cal is going to be really competitive this year, guys. Don't sleep on the Golden Bears. Justin Wilcox, I think, is going to have a pretty good team this season. They're one of the teams that I think got some pretty underrated picks from the transfer portal. Tobias Merriweather, I mentioned his name earlier in this video, coming over from Notre Dame, is one of those pieces. They got some good offensive pieces. The defense, I think, should be a little bit better this season, and Cal wins that one. But I think Stanford gets at least 2 wins this year. Maybe it's Wake Forest. Maybe it's another game where Stanford can pull off some sort of upset. But San Jose State, while they still might end up being a pretty solid team, all things considered, in the Mountain West Conference this season, I mean, that team got decimated. Brent Brennan, their head coach, is gone. They got a lot of losses through the transfer portal. I think Stanford wins that one. So 2-10 is my record for the Cardinal. Technically a step back record-wise, but I think the schedule, well, it doesn't really set up that nicely for Stanford. However, there are some pieces here to see some improvements for Troy Taylor's group. I happen to not think that the Cardinals are going to be very good this season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. We will move on to the rest of the group of 5. We'll start out with USF, South Florida. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.